Starting today with Project Minded, we're going to continue work on my old boat. After the epoxy barrier coat that we finished up last time, what the next step is to sand off some of the hairs left off by the rollers in the epoxy barrier coat. Just unfortunate snag, but quick sand with 120 ought to get rid of those and set it up for the epoxy primer that we're going to do later. I'm going to do that with the boat still on its backside just because it's a lot easier to do it rather than on the trailer or underside of it to smooth it out properly. But once we get that sanding done, it's going to get pulled out, we're going to flip it over, and then the real fun begins doing the body on the top side as well as the trim, structural repair, and the meat of the project. So, here we go. As good a time as any to flip it over because we're not on the final coat system yet. It's just the barrier coat to waterproof it. That's done. If there's small scratches in it, it's going to get taken up by the high build primer that we're using shortly after I do the top side. So considering there's still a lockdown quarantine, I got to do it on my own, but it's not going to be graceful, but it'll work. But it stops at the floor. It's only this piece, so I'm comfortable keeping going. All right. Well, okay, that's the real nasty stuff, but that's the good stuff. That tells me a few things. The floor of the boat is dry. Further up, the support is solid. And we've gotten all the rot, at least in this direction. So we're doing the same process for this top side, which again has good wood in behind it. We're going to continue that all the way along here. Do the other side, and once both sides are done, we're going to replace the lumber, epoxy it in, put a single layer of fiberglass to make sure it's nice and strong, and I might introduce some extra gussets between here and the top side, just to give it a little bit extra strength for when we eventually do our wake tower style tow bar that I'm going to make. Hopefully it goes well. If not, we'll just tow off the stern like we have been, but it's an eventual goal, so may as well get the structure ready for it eventually. Anyway, let's keep cutting. Back at the boat again. So where we left off is cutting the rot out of the boat, which wasn't terrible, especially given the age. Mainly among the areas of the boat where people were climbing in and out over the years. Some of the other pieces I'm going to be doing are just some touch-ups with some old mounting holes that aren't going to be used anymore. We'll fill in all the cracks in the top side. We're going to lay out some of the new stuff that I want for it. That includes like a new dash setup and a few other things. Once those are all done, then we can start thinking about bodywork for paint. But in the meantime, I'm going to use some spar varnish to seal the cuts before I cut the new pieces to fit for those supports. And then it's going to be fiberglass over top for these supports. And then we're going to use an epoxy to seal the floor, just because it's worn through in some places. None of it's rotten, it's all dry. But it'll need some protection to last another, well, hopefully another few decades. Well, she might be done. Well, it's time for disappointment. So this boat was sealed from the factory with a fiberglass floor. It's still plywood, but it had a coating of fiberglass over top, which apparently gave the illusion that, like I say, most of this is solid. But put my heel in the right place, and then we find that the top side is solid, but the underneath has been rotting out because there's nothing sealing it from underneath. So now here comes the hard part. You just keep digging, and we keep digging, and then we got to figure out, is it still worth it? Here we go. So, after a moment of crisis last time, we're back at it, and even if the spars are rotten, we're just going to have to carry on, because the difference of a little bit more fiberglass and a few pieces of lumber, considering the big stack of brand new parts we're going to look at, may as well keep going. We're already there. So, it's okay to feel defeated after a project goes south, because, well, it's a project. That's the whole point.